The members of the board have seen a copy of the study. It was previously provided to us to review in advance of this meeting. So we've seen it, the administration has seen it. Beyond that, it has not been disseminated to anybody. And I just wanted to clarify a few things. The members of the Board of Education were interviewed in the same manner as members of the community and various stakeholders were interviewed. Aside from having bi-weekly phone call updates with FourPoints, members of the Board of Education were not involved in the creation of this study. We created the RFP. We asked for what would be included in the study, but we were not involved in any aspect of writing the study, nor were members of the administration. The administration's input involved responding to inquiries made by FourPoint, but I just wanted to clarify for everybody that we have seen it at this point, but that we were not involved in any aspect of writing this study. And with that,
okay, so this is, I'm gonna kind of talk this way, but I'm gonna try to keep everybody in the conversation here. So hello everybody, I'm Sharon. I've had the pleasure of talking with many of you before on my trips here, certainly everybody on the board, and I do want to thank everybody for their input, especially Nancy's team. They answered a million questions, provided a lot of information and clarity to us so that we could really understand what is happening in the district, and we are going to report back to you what we have learned through these conversations. Okay, so this is just the FourPoint education slide. This is my firm. We work with a lot of school districts to help them build coherent strategies, equip strong leaders, enable high-quality teaching and learning, and foster continuous improvement. A big piece of that work is helping districts to use their resources wisely. And I think this is the question here. How do you best use your resources to make sure your high school kids get an excellent education? Okay.
Sharon, I just want to, one thing I should have added before, throughout the presentation, I had spoken to Sharon prior to the presentation. Throughout the presentation, if members of the board have questions, please feel free to ask them. And then what we'll do after we get through the presentation and the questions from the members of the board, we'll open it up to members of the public if any of the members of the public have questions for Sharon.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so our goals for this study were to really look at options for what's the best way to provide an excellent education for the high school students. And as the board indicated earlier, we were about collecting and analyzing data so that everybody could make good decisions about what to do next. Informed strategic planning. I'm going to go one more here. So methodology. The methodology we used was to collect a whole lot of data to assess the costs and benefits of various options for educating high school students. And most of you know all of this and participated in some of it. We did surveys and focus groups and community meetings. We did a landscape analysis. We talked to lots of people locally to understand what's going on in your community so we could really think about how all the pieces fit together. We did a review of the high school program to really understand what the course of study looks like at your high school compared with other local high schools. We did a budget analysis to understand what the cost would be of closing the high school and sending kids to another high school, should that be what you decide. No decision. We did a review of state laws and funding formulas. In New York, it's very complicated to close a school, send kids to another place, understanding the costs and all the rules and regulations. So we checked on all of those and put that information in the report. And finally, we did a literature review to understand what are the benefits and the challenges for students of attending a very small school. So that was the methodology. When we talked to you guys and did all of our research, 3 recurring themes. We heard the same 3 things from every place we looked, everybody we talked to. And it really is that the size of the high school is both its greatest strength and its greatest challenge. So we also heard that there's a looming cloud of uncertainty about the future of the high school, and that was stressful for everybody. It's stressful for the faculty, it's stressful for the kids, it's stressful for the general public. And really, we heard this anytime we spoke to people through our survey. This was very recurring, and it ended up being the most important thing for some people was uncertainty. When we asked folks what was most important, really having certainty was high on the list. We also learned and heard that the community really needs good information to make decisions about their school, to do strategic planning. Hopefully this report will provide that information. And we also heard that there was uncertainty about the future of Tuxedo Farms development. That was exacerbating the first two findings. So at this point, we have, in our analysis, sort of put the Tuxedo Farms conversation to the side. We have not seen any signs of anything changing at the moment. We know that there have been other conversations about what could, should, might be built. But at this point, there's no certainty in it, so we have just sort of moved that piece of the conversation to the side for the purposes of this analysis. Okay. So we started at the basics, trying to understand what does the student population look like here in Tuxedo so that we could understand what it might look like going forward for the high school. And the first part of the graph shows the elementary school kids, the second part shows the high school kids, and you can see from here that our enrollments are somewhere between 14 and 17 kids. 29 was the last graduating class, so they are out of here. And that we also looked at the transition data, kids coming in and kids going out. And there are some children who leave in their high school years, but there also have been students who are paying tuition that have come in every year. So as a net, you are losing a couple of students every year, 2 to 3 students. But we've seen an increasing number of paying tuition students over the past few years. And if the trends continue, it will keep the enrollments about level. So this is what we can see at this point. The school board also helped us to develop a set of comparison districts that we can say, how does our high school compare with other schools? So 2 of these districts, I can read it, I can see people squinting in the back. Monroe, Suffern, Ramsey, and Northern Highlands, those are the 4 districts. 2 of them are here in New York, 2 of them are in nearby New Jersey. They range from 10 to 12 miles from here, so they're all very close in terms of their mileage. They all have space to take more students, should that be an issue. And the other thing is they all have relatively large high schools. So the 4th column on the table is the number of students in the high school, and you can see that Monroe Woodbury High School has 2,318 students, or had this past year, and that Ramsey has 870, all of which are much larger than the high school that your students currently attend. So then we looked at how do the academics and the extracurriculars at your high school compare with the academics and the extracurriculars at other nearby high schools, the 4 in the comparison group in particular. And what we found, and this is not going to be a surprise to anybody, is that the academic program is very similar to the comparison schools. You guys have all of the same core classes and major electives, and that in addition, your high school is a very high achieving and an innovative school. By every measure, your high school does great compared with other high schools in New York State. I think you have a 100% graduation rate. That is marvelous. You also have, I think, 20% more students graduate with a Regents degree in your district than compared to the state average. So by all of the measures, your high school kids are doing really well. The high school has also created an innovative schedule. It's a longer school day, which is always a great thing for kids. There's a lot of research to back that up. And that the schedule has 10 periods, which allows for more elective time for kids, and more importantly, for the schedule to block classes together, which really allows more project-based learning. So there are a lot of good things happening here. There's the STEM focus. I know you all know about the STEM academies and the STEM focus here. Your kids have one-on-one technology in your high school. all state-of-the-art kinds of modifications for high schools. You have all the core classes, and your electives are pretty much on par with other districts. You have a rotating schedule of electives here, and sometimes kids in multiple grades will be in the same elective class, but by having that innovative schedule, you are able to provide quite a wide slate of electives. When we look carefully, some of the other high schools have some additional business courses. We found a financial literacy course, but really not a lot of differences between your academic program and your electives and what other districts are providing their students. When we looked at extracurricular activities, there was some difference there. The bigger schools, no surprise, have more sports and other activities. They are able to have feeder teams, a freshman team, a junior varsity team, a varsity team, and a wider array of clubs and sports. So that's what we found here. You guys have any questions yet? Keep going.
I actually do, but it kind of goes to the report itself, which obviously everybody does not have the detail at this point. Within the report, you included an appendix that includes a list of the comparative of the courses that are offered by the other schools versus our school, as well as the electives. For the sake of, I do have a question that I need clarity on. In terms of the 2 to 3 year rotation of electives, does that mean that we don't offer every elective every year, that it's on a rotating schedule, that from year to year, the variety of electives changes?
Yes.
Okay. And then also, there was an appendix that included a detailed list of what courses we offer as compared to the other districts. I would have expected to see something like that with respect to extracurriculars. And I don't know if you have that data that you collected from other districts, say that other schools offer more, but it doesn't get into a lot of detail about what extracurriculars are being offered. It mentions some clubs that are offered at our school, and actually within that section of the report where it talks about the clubs that are offered at the high school, a couple of those clubs are actually GGM clubs that are referenced in that section. But then also, I would have liked to have seen, if you have the data, about what extracurriculars are offered. And we do talk in the report as well about clubs that need, or teams, and you know, one of the downsides sometimes of a bigger school is that you do need to compete for spots on teams and clubs, and just because it's offered doesn't mean that you automatically will get a spot there. But what I'd like to see is what other schools offer, and if they're willing to provide the information to you, which electives or clubs require a competitive admission, or that all students are eligible to participate in.
Okay. Well, I don't have we have a lot of data about the different activities that are at other schools. We could put together a table that compares them. I don't have the information about which require competition to get in.
Okay.
So if you want us to collect it, we can, but I'm not. The reason we didn't create a table with all of the activities is because it's long and long and long and long and long. And that's why. But let me see if I can provide you some more data on that to help unpack it a little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
I have a question, and
Yep.
maybe it's for us. I don't know if it's for you specifically,
Okay.
but are we going to be sharing those tables that you were just referencing with the public? Because I think it would be helpful for them to be able to see all the courses the way we did.
Well, because that's inclusive, the academic one is inclusive of the report as it currently exists in the appendix, but what I was suggesting is that we also include an appendix that makes reference to the extracurriculars. But the course data is in here, isn't it?
Yeah. Maybe sharing.
Oh, the entire report, yeah, the entire report would be shared, yes.
See the appendixes, that's tomorrow. Okay, great, thanks.
Okay. All right, so we're going to push on and talk about the cost data that we looked at and what we learned. So this first slide is really to help us put the cost information into perspective. So because Tuxedo is a very small district, you guys have a high per pupil expenditure, $47,900. The average in New York is $19,000. The Suffern PPE is $28,700. So while yours is definitely higher, it's It by itself is not startling or surprising or something you should worry about finding. It is because you have a small school district, and small school districts tend to have higher PPEs. The real question is, what are you doing and how are you spending your money? So that becomes the question, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. Your school district budget is about $13 million a year. I think it's good to always have sort of a bench post to know about how much money you're spending a year for your education. The district has created many operational efficiencies by integrating systems across your two schools. You guys share facilities, you share transportation, and you share some of your staff. So with the finances being woven together like that, it makes it a little complicated to pull them apart. And you'll see later, we did pull them apart, but you'll understand some of the findings later by remembering how integrated those two schools are. And lastly, the GGM building, I think the building that we're in now, is donated or deeded to the district. So it greatly, and there aren't a lot of facilities costs associated with the building. So it's just the operation and maintenance. So there are not a lot of costs associated with this building at all. And again, you'll see that as we look a little bit more at the cost data. Okay, so what we tried to do here is untangle all of the things that all the savings that would happen if we closed the high school, and all the extra costs that we would incur if we sent the students to another place, because both of those things will have to happen. And the final numbers are on the next page. I have it for you, so you don't have to try to calculate it. So let me go through the different buckets here so everybody understands what we did here. So we looked at salaries and benefits, how many fewer staff we would need at the high school if there were no longer 9th through 12th grade there. And that's that first number, which is salaries and benefits. It's the loaded number. There are other costs associated with high schools. There are the Chromebooks, there are the field trips, there are the test prep. So all of those other costs associated with schooling 9th through 12th grade are in that other cost bucket. Administration, we hypothesized, nobody told us anything, nobody directed us anywhere, that you might think about revising your administrative structures if you have only one school instead of two. So that number, which is offline, I apologize for that, that $220,000 is a loaded figure. It's the average salary and benefits for all of the administrators in the district. It's not any one person's salary, so it's a compilation number. Facilities and maintenance, you would save $230,000 if you didn't have students in this building, and that leaves a total savings of $2.7 million. On the increase side, there would be additional transportation costs. You would have to get your kids from here to another district. By state law, it is the responsibility of the sending district to pay for transportation. This transportation estimate is based on the ability of the district to not purchase any more buses, but to use the buses they have with additional runs to make it all work. We'd have to move the schedule around, but we think that it could be worked out for this amount of additional money. You would lose some of your state aid, because some of your state aid is tied to the number of students you have. So you'd lose $100,000 in state aid. You would lose $100,000 in tuition you're currently getting from non-resident students, because they wouldn't be coming here anymore. And that you would have to pay between $800,000 and $1.7 million in tuition to another district. And we'll go through that range in a minute. But there's a range because it is a negotiated amount. We don't know what it is until you actually sit down at a table with another district. So that leaves the total increases for just a little over $1 million to $1.9 million. Adding them all up, here's what you get. So we did a couple of different scenarios here. We called them the best case and the worst case scenarios. In the best case scenario, you're able to negotiate a low tuition rate for your students in another district of $12,000, and you're sending 75 students. Because that's about what you would have without your tuition paying students now. In the worst case scenario, you would have to pay $20,000 in tuition, and that $20,000 number is the maximum amount that Suffern could charge you. The Seneca Falls rate, as you all call it, it's the maximum amount anybody could charge you to send your kids there, so it's $20,000. And we also bumped up the number of students there because we heard that there are kids who are currently going to private school who might come back to the district if there was an option to attend a different school. And under that circumstances, you would have to pay their tuition too. So that's where the big split comes from. And in your best case scenario, you could save 12% of your budget. And in your worst case scenario, you could save 6%. And best guess is it would be somewhere in between there, that you would be able to negotiate a rate in between there, and you would have some extra students come back, but that would be the max that could come back. Questions about that?
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dorothy.
You specifically referenced Suffern and the New York State, worst case scenario for tuition rates and what state aid would be lost, but you didn't, I don't recall if in the report you specifically reflected how that would change if it was a New Jersey school versus New York.
Okay.
So if you could just address that for a
Yeah,
second.
sure. So with it really, it doesn't matter whether they're in New Jersey or New York, you're gonna have to pay a tuition rate.
Right.
So the Suffern rate I picked because they had the highest Seneca Falls rate of any district. So I figured that could be the maximum, like it really is an upper bound number. So that's why I picked that one. If you went to New Jersey, you would negotiate a tuition rate with somebody there. And I spoke to a couple of folks in the district off the record calls, and that they are charging other folks in the $14,000 a kid range, and that's about what they would charge you. That's why I feel like if you could negotiate something in there. So it really wouldn't be any different there. The only difference with going to New Jersey is that you can negotiate a longer contract. So in New York, you can only negotiate up to a 5-year contract with another district. In New Jersey, you can negotiate a 10-year contract.
This might be more of a legal question, but wouldn't we be, as a New York resident district, wouldn't we be bound by New York state law, though? I don't know if that we would be able to enter into a 10-year contract because the school is in New Jersey if we're in New York. I mean, that might be a question for our attorneys.
Yeah, I think you would want to ask your attorneys. My understanding is you could, and that the New York state law says that you can enter into an agreement with other districts in New York or in a nearby state. So.
To that point, one of the questions that we had in the past, and maybe you answered this, but would there be any effect on our state aid if we were to choose a district in New Jersey as opposed to New York? And then a second question that I have on the state aid that you mentioned before. So I guess there's a portion of the state aid that is based upon pupils in your building. Versus, because if we send kids out to another district, they're still our students, but if they're not physically within our building, I guess that affects our state aid formula? Okay.
So the answer is, I was hoping you weren't going to ask me about the state aid, but I'm going to tell you, it's very kind of crazy and complicated in New York. So New York awards state aid in a couple of buckets. The biggest bucket of state aid is what they call their foundation aid, and you guys get about $550,000 a year in your foundation aid from the state. That foundation aid, by formula, is based on the wealth of your district and the number of kids you have. So because you are a relatively wealthy district, you don't get a lot of state aid compared to other places, but you get this $550,000. So the state is supposed to run the formula every year and adjust the state aid amounts based on the wealth of your district and the number of kids you have. At least 5 years ago, they stopped rerunning the formula every year, and they grandfathered everybody in at the amount they had about 5 years ago. So the amount of state aid you are getting is based on a pupil count when the Greenwood Lake kids were still here. You're getting a lot of state aid. If they ever decided to happen, the reason they pegged it for 5 years ago is there are like 400 districts in New York that are all losing kids, and every year the state would have to cut their aid, and that just makes it very hard to manage a district budget. So the state has made a policy where they just pegged you to where you are, and if they give you additional state aid, it's based on your aid from the last year, not on recalculating the formula. Does that make sense? Kind of.
So it seems it wouldn't be whether we sent our students to New Jersey or New York, we would be getting the same amount of state aid.
Right. But on the other side, and I mentioned this in the report, if you send your kids to Suffern High School or another high school in New York, they won't get any additional state aid. So all they get is the tuition you give them. For the same reason, they're pegged at the number of kids they've got. So everybody's pegged. The only time it changes is if you get a lot more low-income kids.
Okay. There was one thing I wanted to add as well, and everyone will see this when they get the actual report. In a previous slide, you mentioned an approximate savings of $650,000 in other costs. A big part of that number, I asked Mr. Matatia this question today, because a big part of that number, it's over $500,000 of special education costs. And that, I just kind of wanted to point out, and maybe we should footnote this somehow in the study, because that piece is really kind of a moving target. That would vary from year to year. My understanding, if this is what you intended it to be, my understanding is that presupposes those costs represent amounts that we pay to other districts because we're not able to educate certain children within our school buildings, that we have to send them to a BOCES program. And the savings presupposes that whatever the receiving district is would have the capability to educate those students within their school, so that we wouldn't have those BOCES costs. But that's a real big. Is that correct?
No, I don't think those numbers, and I'll speak to Mark. I understood that the numbers, that the money to pay for kids who are currently going to BOCES for special ed, those kids keep going to BOCES for special ed, that this does not include your special education students who are out of district. This is just the kids who are in your building now.
I'm confused then, because within the other I mean, we can have this conversation at another time, because within the other cost, there's $500,000 of special ed costs, so.
Is that, why don't we make sure we get to the bottom of it? I don't know the answer. I would need to go back and dig into the data and talk to Mark about it again.
Okay.
Okay. All right, I'm going to push forward here. Okay, so here are some other considerations that came up in the conversation that have costs that are a little hard to put a number value on, but they are associated costs with closing the high school. So the first one is loss of control over, it shouldn't say district management, it's management of your school. So if you send your kids to another school district, you don't have a seat on the board, you don't vote. So that you really don't have the same kind of say you have as if you're voting, if you have a voting voice in what happens at your school. There are also implications for the lower school if you pull the two schools apart. And that is, first of all, you would have to figure out the staffing for grades 7 and 8. Right now you have full-time teachers that teach 7 through 12. If you only had 7 and 8, you would need part-time teachers because there wouldn't be enough classes for them to teach full-time. So in each of the subject areas, you would need part-time teachers. We estimated about 0.4. At 0.4, they wouldn't get health benefits. And so it would be very hard to attract those teachers. So it's something to think about in terms of sort of ripple effects back to the lower school. We also think there'll be some ripple effects on the program of study for the kids in K through 6, because there will be the music teacher that remain will need to fulfill all the requirements, the state requirements for your middle school kids before they do their specials for the elementary school kids. And so there probably will be some cutbacks in special classes like music, and I don't know which other ones, I'd have to look back, for those K through 6 kids. So there will be some cutting back there too. And then there are logistical challenges around the shared services. So right now the little kids are here in the building where the gym is. Getting them to the gym is pretty easy. They walk down the hall. If it's the dead of winter and you need to go from the other building where all the kids would be consolidated back over here to the gym, it creates more complications. I'm not saying, not judging those complications, but it does create some complications. So those are the other things we haven't costed out with a dollar figure, but are definitely costs for closing the school. And then the last thing is the long-term cost considerations. And I think if we consider the worst-case scenario in terms of cost, that should address the longer-term cost considerations. The cost can't rise higher than that rate, and New York State is not going to suddenly raise that rate significantly. So I think that would be a way to understand and know how much your costs could go up. I will also say that I've spoken to people in several other districts, and they, like in a lot of places, districts are losing students. They would love to have more students. And I think having more students continue over time would be a good thing for other districts. So there would be some leverage in terms of negotiating costs over time with other districts. Questions?
Sharon, in your research, I understand why you're using the Suffolk and Seneca Falls rate, because that's the highest rate you encountered. Did you encounter whether or not New Jersey has any type of similar cap, similar to like what we have, Seneca Falls in New York?
I didn't find a cap, but I did have both districts in New Jersey that are on the slide indicated that the rates that are on there are about what they're charging other districts, and they would think that that would be about the rate that they would charge to another district who might be interested, and that they both said, actually all of the districts say that we have long-term relationships with other districts and that they have never really raised the rates significantly when they've renegotiated, that they feel that the kids are their kids, just as you felt the Greenwood Lake kids were your kids. And so they were sort of surprised even at the question.
Okay, and then I just have one other comment. With respect to the program of studies K through 6, and this is obviously premature to even be discussing, and I understand your comparison is apples to apples, that if we had to let go of certain teachers at the high school level, is some cross-teaching going on, so that would affect K through 6, but obviously if there was room available in the budget, those services could be replaced as well. It wouldn't automatically mean that we would have to go without a K through 6 band program. We could simply replace those services with another teacher. I mean, obviously that's, but I understand you're comparing budget to budget and what we'd be cutting and what we'd be losing, but then that doesn't mean one is not dependent upon the other, just for sake of comment.
Yes. No, I think that's right. You always have the option of paying for something you would like to have for your students. Okay, so we did several community meetings, and we did a community survey, and we wanted to share with you what the community thought about the strengths of the high school. So uniformly we heard that the school is a safe and nurturing environment, and I was really glad to hear that you're thinking about a school climate survey, because I think many of the things that we heard during our data gathering speak directly to the kinds of things that you would learn about and hear and track in a school climate survey. So students feel very well connected to other students and to staff. Staff felt connected to students and parents. All of these things are the things you hope you see in your school climate surveys, because they really are correlated with outcomes, good outcomes for kids. Students get a lot of individualized attention and a high quality education. So this again, we heard this from everybody in every place that we gathered data. Students had many opportunities to participate in clubs and activities. We heard this over and over again, and we also saw it in the literature that small schools, kids tend to have more opportunities to participate in sports and activities. Staff report a high level of satisfaction, a level of satisfaction that would score off the charts pretty much compared to most other places. And community members felt connected to and welcomed at the school, and we heard a lot of that all around too. We also heard there were challenges. Students have limited social interactions and activities, and this is probably the #1 challenge that we heard from everybody who we spoke with. And some of the students had mixed opinions about the quality of the learning environment. So we wanted to report that too. Some of them felt like they weren't always getting the best classes and it wasn't the best education. Community members worried about losing control if they send students to another district. And again, these are results that came from the community meetings and from the community survey. Some people felt that the education costs and property taxes here in Tuxedo are just too high. We heard quite a bit of that in the survey. Others worried that closing the school would negatively affect property values. We also heard a lot about this in the survey. And uncertainty about the future of the school was a common theme, and when we asked people to rank, uncertainty was often the first thing that they ranked when they were worried about the school. Okay. Anybody want to ask, you guys want to ask any questions about these?
I have a question.
Yep.
That goes more to the report than what's up here, but
Okay.
I don't know if you're going to address it. In the report, you had said that the New York SED, you had contacted them and they indicated that if we chose to close the school and then we had an influx of students, say Tuxedo Farms gets built, that we would be able to reopen the school. That that's possible. I'm wondering if they had any examples of where that may have ever happened before, if they have.
It has, and they gave me examples, and I have emails with all that information that I was going to give to Nancy before I am done with the, as we tidy up all the loose ends at the end of the study. But yes, and I know we heard from lots of people that you can't open a school, and I specifically said, could you give me an example? And I
Thank you, just because that's
I know.
a point that people, well, yes you can,
Right.
you can,
So,
yes you can.
so here's a data point, here's a person, here's some examples. It's the best we can do. We can never guarantee anything, but they were pretty forthcoming with the information.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How many students took part in the survey?
How many students? I don't know that off the top of my head. I could tell you that, but I don't have that right in front of me. It's probably in the appendix to the report. I didn't print out the appendices. Let's see what we've got here. Thank you. You know what? Let me figure it out while we're having some conversation. The number's in here. I just don't know. Okay. I want to make sure we get to have conversation. I can look that up. Was there a second part?
No.
Okay. All right.
Excuse me, I have a second part.
I think we need
We're
to.
going to finish with the board, and then we're going to open it up for questions from the public.
Thank you. Okay, so the last piece that we did here was research on small schools. We really wanted to know what the value and drawback of attending a small school is for high school students. And I have to admit, I was very blown away by the research. There is a very compelling case about the benefits of small schools, especially for high school students. So small schools tend to have better outcomes for students. Academically, students tend to do better. Students feel safer and have stronger relationships with adults, peers, parents are more engaged, staff report greater job satisfaction at small schools. All of these things are highly correlated with student success. This is an interesting one. The optimal size of a high school is about 75 students per grade. So this was one of these things where some of the literature tries to peel it back and say, well, what if the school is smaller than that? And they seem to think that the findings hold, but there wasn't nearly as strong a research base of that. And I also want to point out that when the Greenwood Lake kids were here, that's exactly about the size you had in your high school, I think, right? About 75 kids per grade. So that's interesting. Large numbers of students do not always lead to cost efficiencies. So we saw that we had a high per pupil expenditure, and what we see is kind of a U-shaped cost curve for schools. So when your school is really small, your prices are high. As your school gets bigger, the prices drop, 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 and then at a certain point, the prices start to go up again. You need more administration, you need more security, management becomes an issue, and we also start to see as schools come up that other side of the U that kids have fewer opportunities. Like there gets to be a point where they have fewer clubs because they just try to funnel more kids into the same kinds of activities. So I thought that was a really interesting finding. And small schools have very strong community connections, and I think we heard that loud and clear when we spoke with all of you. Okay, so here I tried to pull it all together and pull out like the key kernels from each of the pieces of research that we did. And this is what we've got. So I wanted to reiterate, and I think it came through loud and clear in all the findings, that there was concern about the future of the school and that the size is both the greatest strength and the greatest challenge for the school. So enrollments are pretty low and they're pretty flat and likely to be that way for the foreseeable future unless something changes in terms of a new development or some other something that brings more kids into the district. The academic program is very strong and comparable to nearby high schools, and that kids here have fewer extracurricular activities but better access to those activities. The district can save between 6 to 12% of the school budget by sending high school kids out of district. That many in the community preferred to keep the high school open, and we did tallies on our community meetings and in our survey information. And families, and this was interesting and probably not a surprise too, families that do not send their children to the high school are more likely to want to close the school. And that came through in the survey. And small schools show better outcomes for students. Okay, so if you want to ask, anybody want to ask anything here, or should I do my last considerations one? So there are a few other considerations that we wanted to put out there as you think about what you're going to do. So if you decide to keep your school open, I think we heard loud and clear that if the school is going to be successful, it needs to have the full embrace and support. People have to stop talking about how long the school will be open if the school is going to be successful. If you're in, you're in. And we got to get that cloud off of people. I think there are a lot of other options to think about for attracting more students to schools. And I've talked to Nancy and some of the board a little bit about some ideas. I put some ideas in the paper, but I do think that there are things to do that can attract more students. And I do think a small school where kids don't fall through the cracks is a very attractive thing to a lot of parents in the area. And that we can consider options for an exchange program with other local high schools. For some kids, going to a teeny school is just hard. It's just hard for them. It's not where they feel comfortable. But there may be a way that you could cut a deal with one of these other or all of these other schools to say, we'll send you 3 kids, you send us 3 kids who you think really want to be in a small school. There may be ways to figure this out. There may be legal implications that I haven't thought of. But I do think there are creative ways to think about how to make the district and the small size work for more kids and families if that is what you decide to do. And it also, if you decide to close the high school, it's probably time to rethink about the structure of the lower school, because you might need to think about how to recertify some of your teachers to teach grades 4 through 8. Right now they only teach K through 6. And those changes are a little bit costly in the beginning. They take time to put in place, but you could restructure the lower school in a way that might give you some more flexibility in your staffing over time. And here's my contact information. So
Sharon,
now,
on your idea with considering options for an exchange program, do you have other examples where other districts have done that?
so some of the folks we spoke to during the interviews talked about exchange, bringing foreign students in, that some districts do that. There are some other districts that have done it. I probably have some information about exactly who, because I was collecting different information. It is something that I could give you some examples when I give Nancy my final data. It's one of those things you have to think carefully about, because kids can get a one-year visa to come, so it is a churny thing, which is not always an easy thing in high school, so it needs to be thought through carefully.
So that suggestion was
Oh,
specifically
I'm sorry,
for...
the exchange students, that was so I was thinking an exchange program with local high schools, so that if you have 3 kids who just really want to be at a big high school, you might be able to send 3 of your kids to Monroe and Woodbury, and they may send 3 kids here. So everybody's got the same number of kids. You haven't changed anybody's cost, but you've got the kids in a place that might be better for them. I don't have any example of that. It was just an idea that I had listening to people.
Okay, that was the question.
Yeah, sorry.
Just for clarification, the best case and worst case financial examples that you gave,
Yeah.
the best case is based on sending out 75 students and the worst case is 85,
Right.
right?
Yes.
We didn't go any higher than 85, like...
No, because I had some data from the district about the number of kids who are attending private school, and I didn't think we could go any higher than that. Like, we knew how many kids were not coming to school here. Yeah. Yes?
Based on your survey, the strengths and the challenges of the students?
Yeah.
It was only on surveys, there was no specific one-on-one interview?
So we did several focus groups with kids, and the statements that we made about how students felt about the school, that they felt safe and they felt good relationships, those were based on the survey and based on the interviews and focus groups we did with them.
Because it was only 8 out of 106 within the survey.
Right, but we did, I think we spoke to over 50 kids when we were here doing focus groups.
This is another cost question. Within the report, you talked about if we were to close the high school, the plan would be to move K through 8 into the high school building. And then there was talk about, the need to continue to use this building for an educational purpose, that we would move our central offices into this building. But yet there were still cost savings of like 200 and some odd thousand of moving our students over, and is that simply because we wouldn't be utilizing this entire building, that you wouldn't need, the utilities expense wouldn't be as high, that you wouldn't need as many, as much in terms of operations and maintenance expenditures? Okay.
Yeah, and we got those numbers from, Mark helped us with those numbers, and yeah, I think they're based on the fact that you wouldn't have kids in all the rooms, so you wouldn't have the cost of maintaining that.
Okay.
Well, I didn't get a chance to go back and look at the RFP, but unless I'm mistaken, we had also asked for specific suggestions on ways to enhance the program. Is that something that, to your recollection, was in the RFP and just maybe didn't get highlighted?
So I would have to go back and look at the RFP, but I think there are some suggestions throughout the report for ways to bring more students in, which is one way to enhance the program. And the program is really excellent. I'm not sure that there are very clear ways that we could recommend. Like, there's nothing missing.